What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I'm joined today by Michael Augello and Kelsey Surmacz of the Hockey News, coming at you as we do every Tuesday and Thursday to talk about all of the latest and greatest storylines from around the NHL in bite-sized portions. But before we get into all of the latest action, do want to remind you that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right, guys, we've got some contracts being signed here. The New York Islanders announced that they have signed their former first-round pick, Cole Yzerman, to a 3-year entry-level deal. Deal's set to kick in next season. Yzerman's going to join the AHL affiliate in Bridgeport for the Islanders. He's going to be there for the remainder of the 25-26 season. So in 71 games with Boston University over the last 2 seasons, Yzerman has 43 goals and 21 assists for 64 points. The Islanders are in an interesting position right now. They've got a mix of veterans, they've got stellar goaltending, and of course, they've got young prospects like Matthew Schaefer, Cal Ritchie, already playing in the NHL. So, Mike, when you look at kind of the roster mix that they have on Long Island, do you think the Islanders have taken a turn and might have one of the brighter futures in the NHL, or how much farther do you think they still have to go?
Well, I mean, Matthew Schaefer can change a lot of things. You know, he's 18 years old and he looks to be on pace to be sort of a generational type of player along the lines of a Cale Makar or a Quinn Hughes. But if you look over the Islanders roster and their organizational depth chart, they don't have a ton of youth. I mean, Yzerman was a first round pick in 2024, and he's a good offensive prospect, two solid years at BU, played in 2 World Juniors. They drafted 3 first-round picks this past year with Eklund and Aitchison along with Schaefer. So, but most of the other youth that they brought into the organization, like Shabanov from the KHL or Cal Ritchie from the trade of Brock Nelson, it's been imported. So they have to do more of that, and they're going to be competitive because they have veteran players. But I think they're going to need to add young players over the next 2 to 3 years to sort of, lighten up that organization in terms of youth, because right now they're a little long in the tooth.
Kelsey, what do you think about the Islanders and where they go from here?
Well, I think, honestly, the 2025 draft changed a lot of things for them. They got the luck of the lottery ball with Matthew Schaefer. They have another really solid that they also drafted in the first round last year. You mentioned Aitchison and Eklund. I mean, Aitchison is having a great year with the Barrie Colts. 28 goals, 70 points, 55 games. We know he's a big hitter, too. He's somebody else that can be a game changer on that blue line. Eklund, I think, has a pretty bright future ahead of him. I know beyond those 3 guys, there isn't much there, but you think about building out youth and kind of like a pipeline. You want to have at least a couple good prospects at defense, a couple good center prospects, and a goaltending prospect. I think they need a little bit more in their pipeline in terms of goaltending because beyond Ilya Sorokin, it doesn't look too great for them. But it'll be interesting to see how they handle that mix of youth and veterans in these next couple years, because I do think some of their veterans are on the decline. We're not going to get too many strong years left out of those guys. So I think they have to be really smart about how they decide to build the roster around those 3 guys that they literally drafted in 2025. So we'll see where the luck of the lottery ball goes this season. It won't be them probably. They'll be in the playoffs more than likely. But we'll see. I think they have a good foundation, though, just literally based on this year's draft. And getting that Matthew Schaefer lottery ball probably changed a lot of things for them.
Definitely. And like you said, the Islanders in a very thick, heated playoff race right now in the Eastern Conference, really tight all the way around. And, I think one of the bigger stories, the better stories from this Eastern Conference playoff race has been the Columbus Blue Jackets. So since Rick Bowness was hired on January 13th, the Blue Jackets have had the second best record in the NHL during that span. They've gone 16-2-4. They're now just 1 point back of that second wildcard spot in the East. So Mike, what do you make of the run that the Blue Jackets have been on? I mean, outside of bonus being kind of the obvious, factor that you can point to, who has been the most impressive during this run? Do you think they make the playoffs? Because we kind of saw this happen last year. They came really close last year too and just missed it.
I think if they make the playoffs, it's going to be less about them and more about the Detroit Red Wings decompensating with the injuries that they have. And Boston hasn't been exactly playing very well of late. I mean, the whole Blue Jacket situation, I mean, there are mistakes at head coach like Mike Babcock and Pascal Vincent that ended up costing Jarmo Kekalainen his job. And Dean Evason is a decent coach, but I think he's more of he's not a player's coach. And Rick Bowness is, from his history. He's always had a history of working well with defensemen, especially. He was really good in Winnipeg and, retired from Winnipeg because I think there was a health situation with his wife or something of that nature. And he comes back in this instance, and they have just been they've been a rocket into the stratosphere since he took over. I think a lot of it has to do with that, but they've been getting great goaltending out of Jet Greaves. So, I mean, goaltending does take you far. And I if they maintain this ridiculous pace, then they're going to be in the playoffs, whether it be one of the 2 wildcard spots, or they could still even have a chance at winning one of the top 3 spots in the Metro Division.
Yeah, sometimes it's all about when you get hot, just getting hot at the right time. And the Blue Jackets, you mentioned Jet Greaves, really good young goaltender. You've got a perennial Norris candidate in Zach Werenski as well. So, Kelsey, what do you think, just from your observations, are going right for the Blue Jackets to get them into this position?
Well, I think it's several things. They also acquired Mason Marchment in December from the Seattle Kraken, and he's doing some pretty awesome things since being with Columbus. He's 12 goals, 21 points in 25 games. I mean, he's close to a point per game there. He's been a big part of it. Obviously, Werenski, you mentioned the goaltending as well. But it seems like this team not only is just relentless, like they just kind of have that aura about them that they don't quit. They don't back down. They're really pushing hard, especially late in games. But it's kind of a 4-line effort from this team. They still have a lot of that youth talent that's pushing. And yes, Zach Werenski is still leading this team in points as a defenseman, which is never really ideal. But it's kind of just been a group effort for them. Connor Garland's pitching in. I mentioned Mason Marchment. Obviously, Fantilli's pitching in. You got Monahan doing his part as well. So it's just been a full hands-on deck effort from this team. They're able to pretty much roll 4 lines that pretty much give them a pretty even attack up and down the lineup. So I think they're just getting the right amount of contributions from everybody, and it's contributing to this full team effort that they're just tough to play against and tough to match up against too. So it's just impressive what they're doing. We'll see if it's going to be enough to get them into the postseason, because no one above them seems to want to lose, or at least lose in regulation. So it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds down the stretch. But Charlie Coyle was another one. I didn't mention him either, but they're just getting contributions from these guys, that they've either acquired over the offseason, acquired during the season, that have really helped push them over the edge this season.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, worth keeping an eye on the Blue Jackets down the stretch here, and just really the whole race in the Eastern Conference. Really, really fascinating to watch. Heading over to the West, though, want to talk about one of the bigger trades this season that came before the deadline, and that's when the Vegas Golden Knights acquired Rasmus Andersson from the Calgary Flames. So what was notable about that trade, because we all kind of knew he was going to get traded, but what was notable about the trade was that it didn't come with a contract extension. So the Golden Knights currently have $4 million in cap space projected for the 2026-27 season. They've got some big contracts right now, guys like Jack Eichel, Mitch Marner, that might be preventing them from working out a deal with Andersson right now. But not much has really been said about Andersson's intentions beyond this season. So, Mike, do you believe that he will end up as a free agent after this season, or do you think that Vegas will make an effort to keep him, a concerted effort to keep him? And if not, I mean, what are some other teams who could be potential suitors for him?
Well, I don't think that Vegas is going to let somebody who they traded significant assets for get out of Vegas. I mean, they didn't immediately sign Noah Hannafin after they traded for him, so I think more than likely they get him locked up on a deal. And we know how cutthroat Kelly McCrimmon is in terms of jettisoning players. I looked at their cap situation. William Karlsson right now, who is on LTIR for the rest of this season, or maybe he comes back for the playoffs. He's almost a $6 million cap hit. So they could very easily trade him off to open up cap space for Andersson. And I'm not sure if the calculation is factoring in the Alex Pietrangelo contract, which is $8.8 million, whether he goes on season-ending LTIR right from the beginning, because most people think his career is over with. So if those two things happen, then I think that they have the cap space to sign Andersson, and I could see him very easily, probably even before the end of the regular season, him signing a long-term deal. If there are teams out there hoping that he gets to July 1. I know a lot of teams will be lined up for a right shot defenseman like him. I just don't see it happening.
Kelsey, what do you think happens with Andersson here in free agency?
I'm in congruence with Mike here. I think this is a situation that gets done. They can pretty easily move out the assets, as he said, and it really depends on that Pietrangelo situation as well. And as he mentioned too, I mean, this is a guy, they gave up White Cloud, a first-round pick for this guy. Like, this isn't somebody that, I don't think they're going to be willing to let him walk to free agency if they can help it, because they gave up significant assets to get him, as Mike mentioned. And he's a big part of their blue line, since that trade. He's been a big part of keeping Vegas, where they are in the standings. So I think this is a guy that they try to keep. They try to hold on to. I think something's going to get done. They'll make it work however they can. They have some expendable pieces on their roster that they would be able to jettison in order to get a contract done if it comes down to that. So I think they're going to re-sign him. Teams are going to be lining up, as Mike said. This is a guy that can really help a team, especially just trying to push for the playoffs. I know, as I covered Pittsburgh Penguins are probably going to be in need of a right shot defenseman because of the decline of Chris Letang. So they'd probably be a team I'd keep an eye on, just because their defensive situation's a little bleak outside of Erik Karlsson and Parker Wotherspoon. But I think this gets done. I think Vegas and him are going to be on the same side.
Yeah, who among us could not use a right shot defenseman in this league? Just like who among us could not use a depth center? I feel like those are just things that are always going to be among the needs of any team in the NHL, especially one that's trying to contend. One of the teams that, is somehow at the same time the 26th ranked team in the NHL, but also right outside of a wild card spot, is the Nashville Predators. So this was a team that we looked like they were maybe embarking on that rebuild. They were going to sell at the trade deadline, allow their young players to come up and get some time. And they did more or less do that. But then they started winning, and so now they find themselves still in the playoff race. So in the midst of all that, the Predators signed their former first-round pick, Zach Leroux, to a 2-year, $1.75 million extension. Leroux, 22 years old. He spent most of the year in the NHL last year, but started this year in the AHL, was recalled on February 25th. He scored once over 10 games for the Preds this year. With the Milwaukee Admirals, though, in the AHL, he's got 14 goals and 14 assists for 28 points in 28 games. So with the Predators already using, like I said, some of their younger players, guys like Matthew Wood, Luke Evangelista, seeing elevated roles now, especially after they shipped off guys like Mike McCarron and Cole Smith at the trade deadline. Mike, do you see them kind of looking to usher in some of their younger talent into full-time roles, guys like Leroux, and then maybe even a guy like Brady Martin, their first-round pick from last year, as soon as maybe even next season?
It would make sense. And if you look at the top 5 scorers on the Predators right now, or top 5 of the top 6, they're 31 or older. So they have to start mixing in some of the young guys. I mean, obviously Wood, as you mentioned, Brady Martin being the high pick that he was, I'm sure that he'll probably be in the mix next season. The other thing is 1.75 million with the cap going up isn't a lot. It's sort of like what $900,000 was before. And if you look at Leroux and you look at the stats that he's put up in the American Hockey League this year, a point per game. A couple years ago, he scored 10 goals in 15 games in the Calder Cup playoffs. There's enough potential there, even though he hasn't realized at the NHL level. This is a guy you roll the dice on. You've got a number of other younger players that have seen a little bit of time with the Predators this year, and whoever the general manager is next year, they're going to have to make decisions on those players. But, you always opt for youth, and you always opt to keep them in the fold.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the big question that's still hanging over the whole situation in Nashville right now is who is going to be the next general manager, because Barry Trotz stepping down after this season, we don't know what the new GM, what the strategy is going to be. Again, I mentioned looks like this could be a team headed down the rebuild path, but Kelsey, you might have some unique perspective on this, because I think a lot of people thought the same thing about the Pittsburgh Penguins coming into this year. They've found a way to get their young players some in elevated roles, as well as having the veterans there alongside them. So what do you think Nashville will end up doing, or what do you think would be the wisest path for them to take here?
I think the situation with Nashville is a little bit different than Pittsburgh, because the biggest thing with Pittsburgh this season is I don't think they expected Ben Kindle to be making the impact that he is at 18 years old. I'm not really even sure they expected him to make the NHL roster. So the fact that he's closing in on 20 goals and already a really solid two-way center and basically kind of a future maybe 1C situation for the Penguins, they already have that on their NHL roster. And I think that's changed a few things for them. Harrison Brunick's knocking on the door in defense too. So I think the Penguins are just a little bit closer in terms of having that elite level youth talent that can help them, and they have a ton of cap space to work with. They can, swap things out the summer. As for Nashville, I think there's probably they're headed down the rebuild path. And in terms of, some of the veterans on the roster, I wouldn't be surprised to see some of these guys moved out too. You're talking about Steven Stamkos, Ryan O'Reilly, some of those pieces to make way for some of those younger players. Because if you look at this pipeline, I still think there's some work to be done, especially just, again, in terms of acquiring elite level talent and those players that can be those top six centers, those first pairing D-men, and then even in the goaltending department too. So I just think they need a little bit more. They're not the easiest way to do that, unfortunately, is by drafting high in the draft and tanking for those lottery picks, even if you do it for a couple of years. So even though they might have an influx of youth on their roster next season with guys like Leroux, I still think it's going to be one of those situations where you'll see them move out some veterans and hopefully make space for those younger players to start seeing how they can build around that core.
I mean, Anna, when it comes to teams like Buffalo, they've sprinkled in young players, but they had top picks like Dahlin and Power, so they sort of fell back on those guys, and both of them are still very young. But you don't want to get caught like a team like Toronto has, where they've traded players like Fraser Minton to a division rival. They sat a rookie like Easton Cowan for over a month for no damn reason. And then at the end of the season, when they have nothing to play for other than tanking for a top 5 pick, and they have young guys who they need to find out what they can do, they still insist on playing old guys like Kali Yarncroke. It makes no sense. And other teams like Nashville have to learn that lesson and see what these young kids can do down the stretch. I know they're in a playoff race, but it's a necessity for an organization to do that.
Absolutely. And I think it's a trap that maybe not quite to the same extent as Toronto, but Nashville has fallen into that trap here in recent years of leaning into those veterans, those pieces, guys who should be more complementary pieces, and trying to make them the centerpieces instead of making the young players the centerpieces. So definitely worth giving those young kids a shot, see what they can do at this level. One guy who is by no means a young kid, but you wouldn't know it to watch him play, is Brent Burns out in Colorado. So he scored his 271st goal of his career on Monday against the Pittsburgh Penguins. He passed Bobby score for 7th place on the list of most goals by an NHL defenseman. Now, it is worth noting that Burns needed about 900 more games to get to that point than Bobby Orr did, but for sake of this conversation, neither here nor there. Seeing that accomplishment for Burns at this stage of his career and how effective he is at this stage of his career for Colorado, obviously they got him on a steal of a contract this year because of his age, but he's still a hugely important piece of their blue line. Mike, what does it say about his just longevity and his evolution as one of the top defensemen of his era, who looks like he is not even close to slowing down?
His longevity is incredible, but I will put an asterisk on this, and I'll say this: when in my 40s, when he did this, he played forward for Minnesota for a sizable chunk. So like Phil Housley playing center for the Sabres, and I think Matthew Schaefer broke his record for most goals by a defenseman. There's a little bit of an asterisk here, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he's had an incredible career. Minnesota, San Jose, then Carolina, now Colorado. I mean, he's still effective, and they're not asking him to be a number 1 or number 2 defenseman like he used to be. They're asking him to be a depth guy. And that is a perfect fit for them. And when it comes to the playoffs, it's not going to be a big thing for Brent Burns to maybe play 18 or 19 minutes if they request him to do so. So it was a great signing by the Avalanche.
Absolutely, definitely going to be valuable to them, especially come playoff time. Kelsey, what do you make of what Burns has been able to do and just the longevity he's had in his career and how pivotal he has been to this Colorado team having so much success this season?
I mean, he's been a huge part of it. Anytime you have, veterans playing at the level that he's still capable of, that's something that's invaluable to a locker room. That's something that's invaluable to a team that's trying to make some noise in the playoffs. He has the experience, he has the resume. So it's just in terms of Colorado, I agree that was a great signing. It's only making $1 million. It's not like they had to pay a lot to get him there either. So, it's invaluable to have a guy like that on your blue line, especially when you're trying to make the playoffs, especially when he's in a depth role. You mentioned that. I mean, I think that's the key thing here, that he's not being asked to shoulder a ton of minutes. He's not being asked to shoulder the load for this Colorado team. Obviously, they have some talent on their blue line over there, so he's not the guy, or he's not relied upon, even to the extent he was in Carolina. So I just think this is a good situation for him, probably one of the best situations he could have asked for. And there's kind of there's a symbiotic relationship with Burns in Colorado this year. They're just getting the most out of each other. He's in a perfect position to be able to do the things he's doing. And hey, I mean, he's closing in on top 10 and top 10 all time among defensemen in scoring. So, I mean, this guy's career speaks for itself. For him and Erik Karlsson through all those years, it was them two just at the top of the league. And it's nice to see him kind of, starting to achieve these milestones, and there's more ahead for him for sure.
Absolutely. I want to go back to, Mike mentioned Toronto earlier, a team that has, of course, plummeted out of the playoff race in the East. And it's kind of a different situation here now. If you look at the Canadian teams in the race or not in the race, depending on how you look at it right now for the playoffs. I mean, Toronto had been kind of a lock for a playoff spot for a lot of years recently. Now, not so much. You've got Edmonton still in the race, but now that they're going to be without Draisaitl for the remainder of the season, their playoff chances have taken a hit. You've got a team like Winnipeg that looked like they were out of it, but now they've been performing well of late, so they could make a kind of sneak in at the last minute. So a lot to watch going on with these Canadian teams in the playoff race. Mike, in your opinion right now, which Canadian team has the best shot of making a deep playoff run, not just making the playoffs, but actually getting there and doing some damage?
I'm not going to make myself popular with my friends north of the border. I mean, I don't think right now a max, I think it's going to be two teams, Montreal in the East and Edmonton in the West. I think Montreal's a first round exit because they're either going to play, if they stay in their current position, they're going to play either Tampa Bay or Buffalo. They might have a better chance against Buffalo because, they haven't made the playoffs in 14 years, and Montreal made the playoffs last year. So, the new playoff nerves will be maybe off of them a little bit, but I don't like their goaltending. And unless Jacob Fowler is the 21st century version of Ken Dryden, I think they're underdogs in the first round. Edmonton could finish anywhere from first place in the Pacific to the wild card. And if they finish in the wild card, they could end up playing Anaheim or Vegas in the first round of the playoffs. I have no confidence in their goaltending, and neither do they. Their defense is in a shambles, but they do have McDavid, and they'll have Draisaitl on one leg, and we've seen him play lots of games in the playoffs on one leg and be better than most players on two legs. So if I had to choose between two of them, Edmonton has a better chance, but I think Edmonton's a first-round loss as well.
Yeah, we say that, but I also think in the same breath, you got to say you never bet against Connor McDavid. You just never can. Or Draisaitl, even with one leg. Kelsey, do you agree with Mike? Any other Canadian teams that you think have a chance of making some noise here in the postseason?
If I'm being honest, I don't think any of them have very much of a chance of making much noise. I mean, you said it with Montreal, the goaltending's a little suspect, but I think they might have a little bit of a chance to maybe make it into the second round, depending on the opponent. I think that is very much a matchup dependent thing. But I'm looking at the Edmonton Oilers. I mean, losing Draisaitl is no small thing, and especially when you have the goaltending problems that they do. I mean, I know they're 6 points, clear of the playoff, the Mendoza line right now, but it's still possible that this team could fall out of the playoffs. I mean, I think their goaltending situation's that bleak. We all know the situation with Tristan Jarry and how that's panned out, how that whole trade has panned out for them. I don't think either of their other options are much better. I just don't think that's a situation that's going to resolve itself. I mean, like you said, you never want to bet against Connor McDavid. You never want to bet against these guys. You never want to bet against Leon Draisaitl on one leg. But it's going to be tough to get there. I mean, there's still season left. There's still teams behind them that are pushing. So I'm curious to see how these, this last stretch run looks for them. But I just don't think either of these teams, and I do think these will be the only Canadian playoff teams, I don't think either of these teams really have enough juice to make it beyond the second round, and I think the second round is even being generous with both these teams this season.
Stan Bowman, GM of the year.
Well, you mentioned the goaltending situation in Edmonton. Safe to say the Penguins won that trade handily, sending Jarry to the Oilers and getting Stuart Skinner and Brett Kulak in return, and they've already flipped Kulak. So definitely safe to say the Penguins are faring better in that trade. And I want to talk about the Penguins here because, of course, Sidney Crosby made his return to the Penguins lineup. He missed 11 games due to the injury he suffered in the Olympics, but he returned against the Carolina Hurricanes and did not miss a beat. Picked up a goal and an assist in what ended up being a loss to the Carolina Hurricanes, unfortunately, for the Penguins. But now that they have Crosby back from injury, they've got Malkin back from his suspension. The team is still firmly in a playoff spot right now in a very wide open Eastern Conference. Kelsey, do you think we'll get the chance to see one last deep playoff run from the Penguins this season? And anyone else, any other kind of factors? You mentioned Ben Kindle. We've talked about Crosby, Malkin. I mean, anyone else who you think has been a big part of this kind of surge into the playoff race here?
Well, I have one name to really shout out here, and that's Erik Karlsson. I mentioned him a little bit earlier when I was talking about Brent Burns too. I mean, people were talking about Crosby coming back, and obviously that's the big story here. He's their best player. He's been their best player since he came into the league 21 years ago. But I think Erik Karlsson's arguably been their MVP this season, and especially since the Olympic break. Since the Olympic break, Erik Karlsson is fourth in the NHL in points. He has 17 points since the Olympic break. That's behind only Kucherov, Necas, and McDavid. So, I mean, this guy is putting up forward-level production right now for the Penguins. Also, his defense has drastically improved this season. He's found a lot of chemistry next to Parker Wotherspoon on that top pairing, who's also been a revelation. So, Erik Karlsson is playing the best hockey he has since his days with the Senators, circa 2017. I mean, this is some of the best hockey he's played of his NHL career, legitimately. And obviously, I think the Norris candidacy is out of the question this year because of the other names that are in that race. But just the things he's doing right now, the Penguins went 2-1-2 without Crosby and Malkin in the lineup. Karlsson was a huge part of that. So he's definitely somebody that's leading through this charge. And aside from that, just looking at the playoff picture too, they're still only 3 points ahead of the Columbus Blue Jackets, who are currently out of the playoff picture right now, and they're 6-0-4 in their last 10 games. So Columbus isn't losing, the Islanders aren't losing, nobody in the East is losing. This isn't going to be a cakewalk for Pittsburgh down the stretch. But what I do think is different about this team, and the reason I think they can make it further in the playoffs, and maybe potentially even make a run, is they don't go away. Like you saw in this game against Carolina yesterday, and this has been the story of them all season, especially during this stretch. They just keep coming. Carolina had all the control in that game. The third period, Pens respond. Carolina scores. They get a goal right back. It's just, they don't die, and they're piling up those OT losses too, those OT points, just because they can't win in overtime for whatever reason, or shootouts. But I think this is a good team. It's a solid 4-line team. They're able to roll those 4 lines largely because of Kindle being that 3rd-line center. All their defensive pairings have done enough to kind of bring them up to this point in their goaltending. I mean, Artie Sheila and Stuart Skinner have also been doing enough to keep the Penguins afloat. They've been good in big moments. So I think this kind of has the makings of a team that could potentially make an unexpected Cinderella this spring, but depends on the matchup. If they get the Islanders, that's going to be a tough one for them, because the Islanders have been the bane of their playoff existence for years and years and years. So we'll see how that shakes out.
Mike, what do you expect from Pittsburgh in the playoffs this season, presuming they do make it there?
I never underestimate what Sidney Crosby can do, even at his advanced age, and Malkin is having a pretty good year. And as Kelsey said, Karlsson still can score and log a bunch of minutes. I think it comes down to their goaltending, whether they go as Filovs or Skinner in the playoffs, depending on what they think is the best course of action. The Islanders with Sorokin, who's going to be a Vezina Trophy finalist, will be a tough out for them. But even if they get by the Islanders, then they're probably playing Carolina. So, I don't put it past them to advance further, but I think probably at best they get to round 2.
Well, interesting storyline to watch. Very exciting playoff race in the East right now. Super tight, not a lot of margin for error there. And speaking of the playoffs, I want to wrap up today talking about Gary Bettman's latest comments about the playoff format. Of course, the commissioner says he has no plans to change the league's playoff format, despite the fact that they have been getting continued complaints from teams, from players, from fans about the current layout. So Bettman said to reporters at the GM meetings earlier this week that he is, quote, more than comfortable with the current format. Later added that if you look at the body of work that our playoffs represent over time, what we have now works extraordinarily well, end quote. Mike, your thoughts?
Gary Bettman is clueless. He obviously doesn't watch the playoffs because, there are situations like last year where you had Tampa Bay and Florida facing off in the first round. Situations like this year where you're going to have Dallas and Minnesota, or whoever finishes second, playing Minnesota in the first round. The 2-3 matchup, I always call it the 2-3 corridor of death, because you cannot, even if you get by the other team, you're too spent to be able to get further. He clearly is not reading the landscape. He clearly is not listening to the general managers in this league. He clearly is not listening to the fans, because the fans have, I think, are tired of the divisional matchups that we've seen over and over and over again. And I've heard theories that this is going to change once Gary Bettman retires and Bill Daly will throw a crumb to the teams and do something that everybody thinks is popular. But just like Gary Bettman is clueless about George Peros doing a good job at the Department of Player Safety, he is clueless about the playoff scenario. I mean, it should be taken out of his hands and it should be put to a vote of the teams, but Gary rules the league with an iron fist, and that's just the way it's going to be.
Well, tough to follow up to that, but Kelsey, do you have any thoughts about the current playoff situation, the current playoff format in the league? Obviously been criticized for many years for its format, but any changes you would make, or what do you think about Bettman's comments on all of this?
Well, I concur that Gary Bettman is clueless because, I mean, it's not like this is just coming from media. It's not like this is just coming from fans. Like the players themselves, a lot of them have expressed the desire to go back to the 1-8 format. I know Sidney Crosby expressed that last season. There have been other players that have kind of said that. You know, I think the players are tired of the same matchups year after year in the playoffs. You know, and I feel like they want to be rewarded for being good teams. You know, you mentioned the Central and the West. I mean, it's a shame that the three of the best teams in hockey, you know, two of those teams have to face off in the first round. One of them is going to be out. So, you know, it's just the format just doesn't work for what the current NHL is. It's not what the players want. It's not what fans want. It's not what media wants. It's what Gary Bettman wants. So I think this is a situation where maybe that's the case. You know, they kind of just have to wait till Gary Bettman hands the reins to somebody else, hands the reins to Bill Daly, whoever. But, you know, I think players too are just tired of the same matchups. They're tired of the format, and I think people want change across the board here. 1-8 is logical. I think that's what most people would prefer to see, and I think that's probably the fairest way to do it. Some people have even suggested the 1-16. I do not agree with that necessarily, but I can see where that's coming from given the disparity between the East and the West this season. But, you know, I think 1-8 is the way that it should be done. But you know, with the league and just the money they make off these divisional matchups and just how the format is now, highly doubt that anything's going to change while Bettman's still commissioner. And you mentioned the player safety thing. It's the same thing. So I think it's just going to be tough sledding until you get to that point.
Well, if you want to read any more about the remaining playoff races down the stretch here, or any of the other teams, players, topics that we talked about today here on the Wraparound, remember to head over to the Hockey News. The Hockey News has been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947. 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start. It's a must-have for any fan. Head to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. That is going to do it for today's episode of the Wraparound. Thank you so much to everyone for tuning in and talking some hockey with us. We really do appreciate it. We'll be back with an all-new episode next week. For Mike Augello and Kelsey Surmacz, I'm Emma Lingan, and we will see you next time.